I am Matthew Bishop. I'm a senior editor of the Economist group, and I'm your master of ceremonies for the next day or so as we explore this very important topic of how to encourage foundations to play a bigger role and a more influential role in driving research and innovation in Europe. This is a topic of great personal interest. I wrote a book a few years ago called Philanthropy, which talked about the potential that philanthropy has to be the sort of smart capital in society, that it, at its best, philanthropy can think outside the box, can back ideas that are unconventional, can take a much longer term perspective than maybe many other institutions in society which are forced to concentrate more on the short term and the needs of demonstrating quickly to people that their results make a difference, whereas so much that's in the field of research and innovation really takes many years to deliver the kind of returns that society notices. And so there's a tendency, certainly increasingly in government, to wonder whether elected representatives get any upside from backing research, and so therefore a huge need maybe for philanthropy to step in. But that raises, it seems to me, and we'll hear a lot about this over the next day or so, very significant challenges. The foundation sector and individual philanthropists rightly do not want to be seen just as a pot of money that can be dipped into by governments to pursue government's own agenda. They want to be there as equal partners who bring more than money, also bring brains and ideas to the table. There needs to be a new way of dealing with each other. We'll probably hear a lot about that. There needs to be a lot of thought given to the incentives and structures by which private money, whether it be foundation money or even corporate money, interact with government to get the best results for society. At a personal level, I've also seen how this new model can work. Some of you will know that I'm a co-founder of something called the Social Progress Index, which is an attempt to measure how a society performs without using traditional financial metrics of success. So we've all heard how GDP is a very limited indicator of how a society is doing. I chaired for the World Economic Forum a group that really was looking at how social entrepreneurs and how social innovation could be more effective. And we felt that one of the things that was missing was a set of reliable measures on social performance of a society. And so out of this, we felt there was a need for an index that measured these things and that wasn't susceptible to sort of just narrow economic analysis. Out of that committee, which was itself a committee of a largely private entity, the World Economic Forum, we then went out and got a number of foundations, so Skoll Foundation, Avena Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, some companies like Deloitte and Banco Compartamos out of Mexico, and then also we brought together some individuals, high net worth individuals. So Larry Page, one of the founders of Google, has also backed this initiative. And so we then hired Michael Porter and a number of other academics at Harvard and brought them in to provide academic rigor and first published the Social Progress Index for countries about 3 years ago. It's had a lot of traction already, and what's been interesting is that we've seen it now be used to create social progress indexes at the level of cities. So we recently published our first Colombian social progress index, which compared the 10 biggest cities in Colombia. That was all funded locally by a mixture of foundations and companies in Colombia. We have now taken Bogota in Colombia and gone down to the regional level there. So each 19 electoral districts are compared on the same basis within the city on outcomes for basic needs, foundations of well-being and opportunity and so forth. And we are now in a reversal of what was the model for the 20th century when GDP was developed around the world as the measure for a society's performance. We're now finding that finally the governmental institutions are wanting to work with us, and so we've been meeting with the UN Development Report people who produce the Human Development Index to work in collaboration with them. We've recently done some work for the European Commission, which has produced a social progress index for the European Union. And it's very interesting to me that maybe this is one example of really the sort of the conversation we're going to be having over the next day or so. How do we get a different approach to research, and how do we take this private sector initiative, private sector funding, and get that to lead to results that benefit society as a whole? Interestingly, and this is a shameless plug, we've had lots of support from foundations outside of Europe for the Social Progress Index, but none from within Europe yet. So if anyone would like to come and talk to me afterwards about that, I'd be very happy to help. Very interesting piece of research before we go into the main agenda, that the EU4I study that's been produced by the people who also brought us this conference, which reckons that about 5 billion euros a year are now coming from the foundation sector within the European Union to support research and innovation. What I thought was also very interesting, though, was how skewed that is, that essentially only 1% of the foundations in Europe are responsible for that 5 billion. And I look at Britain, which seems to be the biggest, which I imagine is heavily skewed by the Wellcome Foundation. So when you take Wellcome Foundation out, it's probably a very different story. So there is a great challenge here to the foundation sector to up its game and play a much bigger role, I think, in meeting this challenge at a time when, as the conference program report agenda makes clear, Europe, as is the rest of the world, is facing unprecedented challenges, both on the opportunity front, but also in dealing with new social pressures, the refugee crisis being but the latest, where there's an urgent need for compelling research that leads to new policies and new approaches to solving the challenges that these developments are presenting to our societies. So I wanted to, those are my brief introductory remarks. We're going to go now to a series of keynote speakers. The first couple we're not going to have Q&A after, but after that, the other speakers, we will throw it open after their comments to a bit more interaction. We do hope that you will tweet, and we have a Wi-Fi address up there and an @PhiSI conference and a hashtag PhiSI, which will help people track down what we're talking about.